It's news for Scotland. You've just clicked on episode 4, week ending the 10th of November. It's news where we are, and I'm Hugh Stewart with our top stories of this week. We'll look at the Scottish Parliament, asking where did Michelle Mone get all that money. It's 23, the hottest year ever. We've got arts news, we've got so much coming up in the next 39 minutes or so. First story, Scotland at COP28. The Scottish Government has announced on Tuesday that First Minister Humza Yousaf will take part in the UN's 28th International Conference on Climate Change. Scottish ministers were very active in the regional government strand of the 26th conference when it was held in Glasgow in the autumn of 2021. Mr Yousaf and Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero, Mary McAllen, will both travel to Dubai at the end of this month, accompanied by people from the Scottish business community hoping to attract investment into Scotland. The First Minister said he hoped to showcase Scotland's role as a global citizen and also wants to add our voice to concerns about biodiversity loss and to the injustice which sees poor people pay for a climate crisis which they did not cause. At COP26, the Scottish Government was active in campaigning for the Loss and Damage Fund aimed at tackling this injustice. The First Minister feels that it's important for governments to meet at events like COP28 because countries cannot work alone. The Scottish Government's strategy is for the just transition away from oil and gas by switching resources to the growing renewable industries. Mary McAllen will also look for opportunities to highlight the progress Scotland is making in new technologies, such as the use of hydrogen as a clean fuel. And by the way, in our last podcast, episode 3, Dr. Joe Murray looked at the prospects of using green hydrogen as a replacement fuel. Now, Michelle Mone and the missing MedPro millions. Well, they're not really missing because we know where they went. The Guardian has already reported that 29 million went to an offshore trust fund for Mone and her family. Also, it's been reported that her husband, Doug Barrowman, has received over 60 million in profit. However, this week the story changed, and before we look at the latest, let's recap on how we got here. At the start of the COVID crisis, the UK government was short of personal protection equipment, PPE, from medics to use as a barrier to limit the spread of the COVID virus. A VIP lane was set up to allow suppliers to submit their bids to manufacture PPE in order to get the goods to where they were needed as soon as possible. Michelle Mone, or to use the Baroness Mone, had early success with the Ultimo lingerie brand and was put into the House of Lords by Conservative Prime Minister Cameron in 2015. Presumably he regarded her, a Glasgow East End girl, as an example of Tory social mobility. Mone's subsequent businesses did not meet with success until she and her second husband, Doug Barrowman, came across the VIP Fast Track. A new company, PPE MedPro, was set up in May 2020 to supply PPE to the health service. Neither Mone nor her husband were listed as having an interest in MedPro. 4 weeks after this company was established, and with no capital beyond the start-up money of £100, MedPro won a contract from the UK government for nearly 81 million to supply masks. 2 weeks later, a second contract for 122 million went to MedPro for surgical gowns. The equipment supplied was never used by the NHS as it failed to meet the required standards. MedPro insists that the NHS specifications were followed and the matter is now subject to litigation. Mone and Barrowman denied having anything to do with PPE MedPro, even after it came to light that Mone had received her big payday and after Labour peer George Foulkes had revealed that she had lobbied the UK government on MedPro's behalf. There are several UK police investigations into alleged abuses of the VIP Fast Track scheme. Mone and Barrowman's premises have already been raided. No charges have been brought, but this week the story changed. Mr Barrowman has admitted that he did in fact have some connection with MedPro. Actually, he controlled the company. This admission comes as a 180-degree U-turn by Mone and Barrowman. For years, they have used lawyers' letters to threaten the press, insisting that it was defamatory for anyone to suggest that they had any involvement with the company. Is there anything else we should know about how MedPro, a company with no track record and no PPE experience, got 203 million of your money? Are there any other abuses of the VIP Fast Track which we should know about? The story isn't over. We'll certainly hear more as the inquiries continue. Incidentally, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in charge of your money at the time was Rishi Sunak. What's up, Doc? When was the Scottish Government actually asked to hand over its WhatsApp messages to the UK COVID inquiry? Questions were raised in Holyrood this week on the news that the COVID inquiry had asked for WhatsApp and other messages 9 months ago. Both the Scottish Conservatives and Scottish Labour have accused Humza Yousaf and his deputy Shona Robison of misleading Parliament when they said that the request had only been received this September. Ms Robison sought to explain the government's position when she made a statement to Parliament this Wednesday the 8th, showing the timeline of events. She said that the initial inquiry came last November, but that was simply to ask about which WhatsApp groups had been set up. In February of this year, the inquiry then sent a final version of that request, looking for any information about the key decisions, whether these were in emails, texts, or in WhatsApp messages. And finally, the inquiry asks for the actual content of WhatsApp messages to be handed over. The Scottish Government insists that it has fully cooperated with the UK inquiry, but that many WhatsApp messages contain personal and sensitive information. Critics have said, however, that it's for the inquiry to decide what information is relevant and not for the bodies supplying that information. For the Labour Party, the MSP for Dumbarton, Jackie Baillie, said that Shona Robison's timeline directly contradicts statements already made by the First Minister and his deputy. And now Michael Matheson's monster mobile bill. Sorry about the headlines. Jackie Baillie was also curious as to how the Scottish Government Minister Michael Matheson managed to run up a bill of nearly £11,000 on his government-issue iPad while on a one-week holiday to Morocco last year. Mr Matheson said the device was being used for parliamentary business and that he was not aware of the tariff he was on until the bill had already been rung up. Ms Baillie said that both she and Matheson have been in Parliament for many years. They've both been on overseas trips, so he ought to know the score when it comes to roaming charges. Officials for Parliament said they'd contacted the mobile provider asking for a discount, but they've refused to knock anything off the bill. Mr Matheson said that £3,000 of the bill will come out of his own personal office expenses. And now let's look at the UK Parliament session in London. Rishi Sunak's final legislative programme, in this Parliament anyway, was outlined to the UK Parliament at the start of this week. For Scottish audiences, there's little of any direct relevance, as most of the proposed bills concerns law and order in England or education in England and Wales. Two items do stand out, however: bills to allow for more North Sea oil and gas drilling, and a proposed ban on public sector strikes. On oil and gas, the King's Speech says legislation will be introduced to strengthen the UK's energy security and reduce reliance on volatile international energy markets and hostile foreign regimes. This bill will support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households. That was a quote. Now, rejecting this approach, which suggests that we can move to net zero by having more oil and gas, Mark Ruskell for the Scottish Green Party said this is a polluter's charter and it misses the opportunity for tackling high energy bills by advancing the renewables sector. Mr Ruskell said the short-sighted actions can only make climate breakdown worse and will continue to do so at the expense of future generations. There was nothing in this speech, said Mr Ruskell, to suggest that the Prime Minister is taking the climate crisis seriously, but everything for oil and gas firms to be jubilant about when the focus should have been on advancing our renewables sector. And for the Green Party of England and Wales, Adrian Ramsey said energy security, addressing high energy bills and reducing emissions will only come from ramping up cheaper and abundant renewable resources such as solar and onshore wind, together with a mass home insulation programme. And finally, on the UK's new legal proposals, anti-strike laws. As I said, the UK government is introducing a bill, and this one will make it unlawful for strikes to go ahead in the emergency services unless unions agree to a guaranteed minimum level of cover. Trade unions, however, reacted furiously. Paul Novak, General Secretary for TUC, said it was wrong, unworkable and probably illegal to force people to work when they had just voted to go on strike, adding that unions would fight this measure every step of the way, both in Parliament and in the courts. Matt Rack, the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, said the Tories are clearly hell-bent on criminalising and victimising trade unions. This threatened onslaught on the right to strike. The Scottish Government said they would not agree to such a move becoming law in Scotland. On climate, European Union scientists reckon that 2023 may turn out to be the hottest year yet. Scientists in the EU's Copernicus programme are almost certain that this year will turn out to be the hottest since records began. Data from the Copernicus Climate Change Service, or C3S for short, revealed that this October was the warmest on record globally. As a whole, it was 1.7 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial averages after 4 consecutive months of temperature records being broken. In Europe, it was the 4th warmest October on record, with temperatures 1.3 degrees higher than in the 91 to 2020 average. This year has seen devastating storms such as Babette, which brought floods to many parts of Europe from Tuscany to Brecon, and widespread bushfire damage in Spain, Greece and Portugal. All EU countries are committed to the Paris Agreement of 2015, which is to prevent greenhouse warming from exceeding 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Although temperatures have gone past that limit for several months this year, it's not continuous, and so it's too early to say if the Paris Accords have actually been broken. High temperatures this year are on one hand due to increased carbon emissions, which still increase every year, but also to the El Niño effect in the Pacific, which brings about massive global weather changes every few years. Okay, so let's look again at the Scottish Parliament. Now, Yvonne has been summarising what's on the agenda in the Holyrood Parliament this week, and her report was put together on the 8th of November, and here is Yvonne's report.
This week in the Scottish Parliament, the main topics of debate and discussion have included a vision for Scotland's mental health, education and skills reform, a sustainable ferry system, negotiations around fisheries areas, cashback for communities, questions on social justice and fair work in a wellbeing economy. This is not to mention the wide array of committee work which takes place in the background and which frequently addresses many of the issues in these debates in more detail. The Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy sets out Scottish Government and COSLA's vision of a Scotland free from stigma and inequality, where every person fulfils their right to achieve the best mental health and wellbeing possible. The scope of this strategy is wider than its predecessors, with an increased focus on wellbeing and prevention. This proposal is actively being pursued between 2023 and 2025 and will involve both Government and COSLA in initiating change and strategies which help the Government to realise its aims during this period. Education and skills reform confirms the intention of the Scottish Government to create a new national qualifications body to replace the Scottish Qualifications Authority, or SQA. Views on these proposed changes will be sought through public consultation to include parents, carers, teachers and of course pupils and students, and will remain open until 18 December 2023. Responses can be made at the Scottish Government's consultation site, Citizen Space. On the topic of a sustainable ferry system, the Transport Minister Fiona Hislop confirmed her intention that the system serving the remote island communities would be aimed at the benefit of people living in those communities rather than the institutes and businesses involved in provision. She confirmed the Government's aim to publish the island's connectivity plan later this year and that it will be a strategic paper covering wider issues than ferries. The vision and strategic thinking for ferry services and ferry-dependent communities is a key part of that and builds on the pre-consultation paper on the long-term plan for vessels and ports, which was produced in December 2022. The Government are establishing governance and delivery structures that are capable of delivering that vision, formerly Project Neptune, and on Clyde and Hebrides ferry services 3. Fair Fares review is also due soon. The committee wanted to bring a cohesive approach to all of those 4 elements. Ms Hislop will announce to Parliament actions on those as appropriate. Coastal state fisheries negotiations take place annually, and this is the platform which debates and agrees on catches within national and international waters. Following the UK's departure from Europe, the UK now negotiates independently, and Scotland plays a major role in these negotiations, with the Scottish Government working to ensure that quotas for Scottish fishermen are proportionate and fair, given the clear socio-economic implications of any decisions made. There was a debate on the issue of cashback for communities, which involves the dispersal of monies received by the Government through the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. The programme has been operational now for more than 15 years and has helped and supported many thousands of young people through the establishment of group supports and activities, helping young people with education, housing and employment. Phase 5 of the initiative has been operational from 2020 to 2023 and has successfully helped many young people, including diverting a number of them away from crime. Later today, following First Minister's questions, which are highlighted elsewhere in this podcast, questions will be raised around social justice and there will be debate on fair work in a wellbeing economy. The key aims of this plan are to support the creation of more high-quality jobs, to increase the number of people earning at least the living wage, the real living wage, help more people, including parents, into work, put Scotland on track to become a leading European start-up nation, support the emergence of internationally competitive clusters of excellence, work closely with regional and local partners, including local government, support the sustained growth of international exports while diversifying into new markets, seize the major opportunities to attract a pipeline of investment across sectors to secure the economic and community benefits from the just transition to net zero, and maximise the economy, supply chain and employment opportunities of renewable hydrogen projects. This is a wide-ranging programme which aims to work towards net zero as quickly as possible and to reduce the need for fossil fuels. This has been a whirlwind look at the work of the Scottish Parliament in just this week, with a brief overview of some of the topics under discussion. With internet access, it's easy to log on to Scottish Parliament and learn more about the issues, identify areas of particular interest to yourself, find out about committees and watch debates on Scottish Parliament TV.
Okay, thanks. That was Yvonne Alexis. Now, there's one thing Yvonne decided to leave to me. There was a late announcement made during this week. I think it was the Tuesday when the Scottish Government announced it was going to amend a previous law. The Scottish Government has a policy for 50-50 gender representation on the boards of public bodies. Males and females should be, if possible, 50-50. However, gender recognition law could affect the way this policy operates. For example, if a board has 4 women and 6 men, could one of those men switch to being a woman, thus making it 5 each? Now, I'm not saying that's happened, it's hypothetical. However, the new change which has been brought in this week will rule that out. And in an amendment to the 2018 Gender Balance Law, following a judgment from the Court of Session last year, for clarity, the definition of a woman is a female of any age. So a man who is transitioned or is transitioning cannot be regarded as a woman for the purposes of this law. The change is in the Gender Representation on Public Boards Amendment Scotland Bill, and it was introduced to Parliament just a couple of days ago. It's a very short one-page amendment, but it will have to be agreed by Parliament, of course, before it can take effect. The change was forced on the Scottish Government following a successful petition by the campaign group For Women Scotland. The legal point challenged the definition of a woman in the 2018 Act, which included a person with the protected characteristic of gender assignment, i.e. a trans person, trans man. The Scottish Parliament functions under devolved law, mainly the UK Scotland Act of 1998 and also, of course, the UK Equality Act of 2010, which is the relevant one here. But the Scotland Act does not give the Scottish Parliament the power to decide what a woman is. Hence, that amendment has to be introduced, and the For Women Scotland group are very pleased that they have made that legal success. Now, let's look at calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Scottish Government is continuing to back calls from the United Nations and the EU for an immediate ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. This week it was reported that over 10,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's military response to the Hamas attack and hostage-taking of the 7th of October. At the UK level, both Prime Minister Sunak and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer are still opposing the demands to stop the fight. Labour in particular is dealing with protests from within its own ranks, with several councillors in England and one frontbencher resigning, and of course Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar also supports a ceasefire. This Tuesday in the Westminster Parliament, Stephen Flynn, SNP's Westminster leader, made this appeal to other parties.
People don't have access to food. They don't have access to clean water. They don't have access to fuel. They cannot turn on the lights. They don't have access to medicine. In many instances, the hospitals that they go to no longer exist. The schools that they once went to no longer exist. The universities that they once went to no longer exist. What we are seeing, and I think this is perhaps where the agreement across the floor perhaps goes away, what we are seeing is collective punishment. And what we so badly need to see, Mr. Speaker, is a humanitarian ceasefire. No, not a humanitarian pause which fills people's bellies to then be blown up again in the days to follow. What we believe in unequivocally is a humanitarian ceasefire. And I sincerely hope that members across this chamber will join us in coming to that position in the not-too-distant future. Because, Mr. Speaker, those are our values. We believe in peace and we believe in the protection of civilians.
This Saturday, demonstrations calling for peace or for support for Palestine will go ahead in several Scottish cities. Vigils or mass die-ins are going to be held in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen and Forres, starting at 2 p.m. There may be others that we haven't heard of. Now let's look at the attitude of Suella Braverman. What is Braverman's game? The UK Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has this week added to her ultra-right image by putting pressure on the London police to ban pro-Palestinian events this weekend, as they come at the same time as Armistice Day recalling the end of World War I. Braverman has already championed the failed policy of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing, and earlier this week called for the police to take action against homeless persons, saying that tents provided by charities should be taken away from them. The other day, the Home Secretary published an opinion piece in the Times claiming that the coming weekend's peace marches would in fact be hate marches and therefore should be banned. Many have wondered why the Prime Minister doesn't sack Braverman, as Downing Street won't say whether or not the Braverman article had been cleared or has the support of Sunak. Commentators are speculating if Braverman is goading Sunak into sacking her, thus setting her up for a leadership challenge should the Conservatives lose the next election, which the opinion polls suggest they most likely will. Incidentally, if you are at any of these peace events, are they going to be as peaceful as we hope? So let us know and we can talk about that next week. The best way to get in touch with us is to go on Facebook. Just look for News for Scotland. If you're going to send us an audio MP3 file, you can send that to our email info@newsforscotland.org. Now let's look at something that happened over in Spain during the week. Anti-Catalonia demonstrations in Madrid. When he took over as Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez of the Socialist Party, the PSOE, sought a political way out of the standoff with the Parliament in Catalonia, in Barcelona. Although the PSOE are unionists, under Sánchez, who is currently acting Prime Minister, the plan has been to defuse the animosity between Barcelona and Madrid by shortening the sentences of jailed Catalan leaders and offering amnesty to those who had been labelled criminal by the Spanish courts. On Tuesday, for a second night, far-right protesters clashed with Spanish police outside the Madrid headquarters of the PSOE. Protesters, some carrying Spanish flags, and some reportedly calling themselves Nazis, demanded an end to the amnesty plan. The far-right party Vox and the mainstream PP, the Partido Popular, both accused Sánchez of helping lawbreakers because he actually does need the support of Catalan MPs from his next government. And just as I was compiling tonight's programme, some news came in from Spain. One of the founders of the Vox party, Alejandro Vidas-Quadras, has been shot. That was today. The 78-year-old was about to get into his car when he was attacked by someone who got off the back of a motorcycle. Senor Vidal-Quadras is being treated in hospital and is expected to survive. Okay, that's over in Catalonia, Spain. Now, what about immigration to Scotland under independence? This week, the Scottish Government outlined its ambition to increase the rural population and to end the decline in Scotland's rural areas by attracting more people to come and settle in Scotland. Last week, the Scottish Government published a new policy paper in the Building a New Scotland series. Migration to Scotland after independence. This paper is part 6 of the whole series explaining how an independent Scotland would work, and it discusses the outline of a humane and principled immigration policy after independence. The new policy would welcome new Scots to our country, and the paper also describes how people seeking asylum and refugees would be welcomed and integrated into our communities and treated with dignity and respect. Other parts of Rebuilding a New Scotland series have already been published at one at a time this year, covering the economy, citizenship, a constitution, and Scotland's place in the world. News for Scotland will review all these proposals in the coming weeks, starting with a more detailed look at that immigration paper in next week's episode. Now, Stephen Flynn also had a reference to immigration in another speech he made in Parliament earlier on this week. This is in the London Parliament, so let's go over to Stephen Flynn again.
Now, Mr Speaker, to the King's speech itself, I was listening very closely, like others were, and I heard the term economic growth used. And, you know, that intrigued me, because we all know that Britain's broke, and Brexit broke it. But we so obviously need economic growth. And for those of us on these benches, there is an obvious solution on this front. There's perhaps 3 or 4 things that we could and should do. Now, they may not be popular with members on certainly the government side and indeed some on the official opposition side, but they are necessary, because all of us, I think, would agree that in order to have economic growth, what you need and what you have to see is the tax base expanded. So the easiest way to do that is to actually increase working age, migration into these isles. But beyond that, it's to ensure that the businesses that we all want to see thrive are able to export directly to the biggest markets possible. In our case, there's one sitting just across the channel, the EU single market, Mr. Speaker. And I think we should be a bit more robust and confident about saying that not only do we need more migration on these isles, we need access to that EU single market. And Mr. Speaker, the argument that the Prime Minister would put forward would be that the agreement, the trade deal that was reached with our friends in Asia is the start of something better. Well, how do we look? And that trade deal is worth 0.08% of GDP. So they would need 50 of those trade deals just to match the 4% hit caused by leaving the European Union.
The SNP there, we need more people and we need to be in Europe. So that brings this week's top stories to a close. And we're going to move on to arts news and another feature coming up later on. So let's first of all look at what's happening in Scotland's art and culture. Now, next week, beginning on the 13th, we have Book Week Scotland. Again, the Scottish Book Trust, the national charity Changing Lives with Reading and Writing, has launched the lineup for Book Week Scotland 2023. It will be themed around adventure. Book Week Scotland this year, taking place from the 13th to the 19th of November, is Scotland's national annual celebration of books and reading, with events taking place in libraries and community venues across the country. People picking up a copy of this year's free Book Week Scotland book, which is called Adventure, may be lucky enough to find one of 7 special silver tickets celebrating the Scottish Book Trust's 25th anniversary, and those tickets are tucked up inside the pages of some books. The silver tickets are redeemable for book tokens, with 6 of them worth £100 and 1 valid for a whole year's worth of books. That's up to a value of £500. These tickets will be sent across Scotland, so readers far and wide have a chance of discovering one. The book Adventure has been published by the Scottish Book Trust, featuring true stories from people across Scotland, as well as exclusive contributions from the poet Len Penny, from Somaya Usmani, the current Scots screever Shane Strachan, May Dusangu, and Gaelic writers Alistair Paul and Sona Charity. 70,000 copies of the book will be given out free during Book Week Scotland throughout libraries and community spaces, and will also be available online alongside the audio and the e-book formats. Book Week Scotland's festivities kick off with an exclusive midnight launch of Jenny Colgan's new book, Midnight at the Christmas Bookshop, and that's at John Kay's Bookshop in Edinburgh. Tickets are available at bookweekscotland.com. Mark Lambert, the Chief Executive of the Scottish Book Trust, said Book Week Scotland is one of the highlights of Scotland's literary calendar, with events for all ages and interests taking place across the nation. Despite the fact that Book Week Scotland is now operating in a shoestring budget due to repeated funding cuts, he says, working with and through our fantastic partners in the country, we have been able to, even so, offer an exciting and accessible programme of events at a local and national level. We could not do this, he said, without the support of the Scottish Library and Information Council, library services and many other community partners we collaborate with. And this is vital because developing a love of reading is a lifelong adventure which brings much pleasure and many benefits to individuals and to the communities they live in. Now, wait a minute, a while ago I was going up the A82 through the Highlands and I said, wait a minute, what's that I can see in the water?
Scientists by the expedition full roam the lake. The big push to find conclusive evidence that huge creatures live in Loch Ness.
Long neck, smallish head, and a huge hump body which I reckon was 30 feet long.
I've really got to get this photo. I feel that I'm the one that's going to get it.
It was just interesting, and we didn't make money out of it or anything.
Loch Ness is a magnet for monsters, myths, and madmen.
We feel so strongly with regard to the reality of what we have that we think is the 10th wonder of the world, if you will. Do you believe it?
I am totally convinced that the people that with the latest investigation are honest and serious-minded men.
When was it last seen?
That's a difficult one.
A new documentary about those monsters and madmen, the Loch Ness Monster phenomenon, is showing in various parts of Scotland this week Already launched in the Eden Court Theatre in Inverness last weekend, the film is coming to Glasgow and Edinburgh and then to other parts of the country. Loch Ness, they created a monster. I was chatting the other day to the film's director, John McLafferty, and he tells me that the fascinating thing about the Nessie myth is how it captures people from the world over. When you ask visitors to Scotland why they came, it's often to visit Loch Ness, Edinburgh, then Loch Ness. A bit sad when you consider the many other attractions our beautiful country has to offer. Nessie must fit into the romantic tartan and mist image of Scotland, which is how we're often regarded overseas. John McLafferty made the point that most of the researchers, dreamers, mystics and madmen who came from the 1980s onwards to point their cameras at the cold, dark waves of the loch came from other countries. They, and maybe we, feel the real need for Nessie to exist. The film takes a darkly humorous look at the many monster hunters and the huge sums of money which Nessie has used up while she keeps hiding shy of the cameras. So the movie has already been at the Eden Court Theatre and it's at the Open Phoenix Friday, so you probably just missed it when you're hearing this. It's on the Glasgow GFT on Saturday. That's Saturday the 11th at 11:30, and I believe it's also in a cameo at Edinburgh, but I can't find that date. Look it up. The Glasgow GFT show is followed by a question and answer session with the production team. Okay, and also, as we reported last week, the Edinburgh Cine and Video Society is holding its fundraiser on Sunday at 6:30. You can join food writer and broadcaster Rachel McCormack in a whisky tasting in an evening themed around the film Whisky Galore. That's £25 to get in. Again, I'm going to return now to the John Maclean 100. This is the 100th anniversary of the death of John Maclean, the celebrated peace activist who annoyed Lloyd George by trying to stop World War I. Like last week, the heats for the song contest are taking place in the Old Burnt Barns, which is upstairs in the Lich's Bar at Glasgow's Barras at East End of Glasgow. Another 8 songs will be performed, and the winners, along with last week's and next week's, will go to the final, which will be in Pollockshaw's Borough Hall on the 30th of November. And that's our Arch news for this week. If you get any stories, send them to us at info@newsforscotland.org or use the Facebook page. News for Scotland is produced in Glasgow by me, Hugh, with Yvonne, Jeanette and Joe. And finally for tonight, here's a feature from Jeanette Hill.
Folks, Jeanette Hill here. And this report's going to be on sexual crimes. Someone on my Facebook page recently was arguing that Scotland had a misogynistic culture, and he used the reporting of rape statistics as an argument, saying we had the worst rates, worse than France, Spain, Poland or Romania. He quoted Statistica.com, which detailed reports of rapes in various European countries, with the UK being the worst, then France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. After that, there's Romania, and right at the bottom there's Poland, being significantly less reported rapes and other sexual violence crimes. I found this a contentious issue. Whilst I don't agree we have a misogynistic culture, and it still prevails, incidences of sexual violence and domestic abuse, mainly obviously against women, seem to support this idea. But crime statistics, however, do not stand alone. A friend who attended a Women's International Conference recently heard a worker from India describe how rife sexual attacks were, and yet so few are mentioned in official statistics. Romania, whilst most of its citizens are indeed law-abiding, has a very serious problem with people trafficking. Its government is trying hard to deal with it, but well-financed organised gangs and Western markets for the trafficked people, many going into the sex trade, make this very tough and a very difficult problem to deal with. According to the publication Recorded Crime in Scotland, 2022 and 23, sexual crimes account for 5% of all crimes, and since 21-22, recorded crimes of this nature have actually decreased by 3%, though these have been on an upward trend since 1974. However, what does this mean for citizens of Scotland, and in particular for the safety of women and girls? Firstly, it is overwhelmingly women who are the victims of these crimes, and overwhelmingly men who are the perpetrators. Some crimes are historic, which change the figures for certain years. Also, as the legal definitions of sexual crimes change, so does the records of such occurrences. For example, the incidences of cyber sexual crimes is now included in these figures. Apart from recorded crime, there are the Scottish Crime and Justice Surveys, where a considerable number report experiencing serious sexual crimes, and about a fifth of these did not report them to the police. So the most common reason for why they didn't report it to the police was they knew their assailant and they feared that they would make matters worse for themselves. Crime figures are always to be taken in context. This includes changing cultural attitudes to reporting, high-profile media cases, changing laws, services to support victims, and police awareness of what constitutes a sexual crime. In 2021, according to the Office of National Statistics for England and Wales, they recorded the highest number of rapes and sexual offences, and it was up 13% on the previous year. But again, the factors mentioned before have to be considered. The rape and murder of Sarah Everin by Met Officer Wayne Couzens had much publicity, and the response of police and prosecutors towards women's safety might have influenced more to report crimes against them. A European-wide legal description of rape and sexual crime is something hoped to be achieved by 2023, but we're not quite there yet. But this will make future crime statistics on this a lot easier to understand. The European Institute for Gender Equality has highlighted this as a major issue in serious sexual crime reporting. This institute contributes to the EU goal of the elimination of gender-based violence, and towards this goal accepts the need for accurate data collection and the actions of member states to hold perpetrators to account. They have also furthered the debate on consent. In some European countries, the idea of withdrawing consent at any time is not yet on the statutes. Age of consent is also a difference, as is what does capacity to consent actually mean, or the effects of relationship status, such as marriage. What effect does that have on consent? The Institute accepts the definition of this crime as gender-based violence, which is an EU definition, and argues for knowledge-based measures to tackle such crimes. It says reliable data on victims, perpetrators and events is essential to combat the serious mental and physical health impacts of these crimes. The Institute's knowledge of the phenomena, policy making, implementation and evaluation, it says these are essential. It states the lack of comparable data across member states hampers the appropriate allocation of funds and the development of effective national and EU-wide policies to prevent violence against women. The EU has a Victims' Rights Directive and states that age and gender must be recorded and a minimum access to rights should be granted across all states. They hope to encourage international cooperation in this and to understand the root causes, incidents and effects on this gender-based violence. The United Nations Convention on Gender Violence said analysis of data can help identify protection failures and where intersecting discrimination against women, say in police forces or courts, can further add to this culture gender-based violence. So to answer my Facebook friend who had the best of intentions, the reporting of sexual crimes is not in itself a sign of a misogynistic society, and according to EU sources may in fact be in part a way towards the solution.
Thanks, Jeanette. Looking at statistics from one country to another can be misleading. They might not have been made up in the same way. Well, that's it for this week. You've stuck with us for 43 minutes. Thanks, it is good to have you there. So for me, Hugh Stewart, that's it for News for Scotland for this week. Back next week again. It's News Where We Are. Thanks for listening and I'll see you later. Bye.